Hello my dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I've got another book talk video to share with you guys. And today we are finally talking about The Great Alone by Kristin Hannah. If you've been around my channel for a while, you may have seen me review a couple of her other books. I've done The Nightingale, which was so good, so good. And then Magic Hour, which was also really good. And now we're going to do The Great Alone, and it made me feel a lot of different things. Kristin Hannah is such a fantastic writer. Her prose is so tight. Her dialogue is good. You care about the characters, and that's really important to me as a reader, is being able to care about and connect with the characters. So this book takes place, originally, it begins in 1974, and it's about a family of three. There's Cora, she's the mom, and there's Ernst, he's the dad, and then there's Lenny, short for Leonora, and she's their daughter. And it starts off, they live, I think, in Washington, and we get to know a little bit about them, and we get to know that Ernst has recently returned home from Vietnam, and he's changed. From Cora's memories and just different bits and pieces, we put together that Ernst used to be a very different man. Him and Cora got together when they were very young. They fell in love, passionately in love, and they care about each other so much. And that makes it difficult for Cora when he comes home from the war because of how much she loves him and how much she remembers who he used to be. But now he's prone to violent outbursts. He has nightmares. He's just a tortured soul. After they've been home for a little while, Ernst gets a letter in the mail from the father of a man who he went to war with. The man died while they were over fighting, and this man is writing to Ernst to tell him what an impact he had on his son's life, and that the son wanted to leave Ernst a piece of land that he owned up in Alaska. So the whole family, honestly, especially Cora and Ernst, they're very excited at this prospect in the beginning. They think, you know, they're kind of struggling financially where they are now, and to them it seems like a fresh new start, especially to Ernst. He feels like this is going to be the answer to his problems. And as we're reading this, of course, we know that what's that old saying, like, wherever you go, there you are. You know, you can't run away from yourself when it's you and your mental health that's the problem. You can't just move and suddenly it's better. But Ernst really wants that to be the case, because of course he doesn't want to be struggling. He doesn't want to be in this dark place all of the time. So they pack up their bags, they get into this old VW bus, and they hit the road. Lenny is 13 years old, and they're off on their adventure. The town where the piece of land and the house is, or cabin I guess is probably a better description of it, is in a very small town that's very, very isolated. And if you know anything about Alaska, you know that it's the land of the midnight sun. I lived in Yellowknife for a period of time when I was in high school, so I can kind of really know what the summers with all the sunshine and the winters with all the darkness feels like. It's really a big adjustment period at first. So they get up there, and it's late summer, early fall, I believe. So it's still very sunny and beautiful. They meet some of the locals, very colorful, eccentric characters. There's a man named Mad Earl. In fact, he's the one who had reached out to let them know about the land that their son wanted to leave him. There's a woman named Large Marge who is kind of like the main woman of the town. You know, she's friends with everyone, helping everyone. She runs the general store. She used to be a lawyer, but she gave that life up to come and sort of live in the middle of nowhere. There's a man named Tom Walker. He kind of owns the whole town, like the saloons and just any businesses. It's kind of, he owns them, and his father before him owned them, and his grandfather before him owned them. And so yeah, we get to see the very colorful characters of this town. And at first it's not too bad. The locals try to get them in the mind frame of what's going to happen come winter. You know, you have to spend the summers getting ready for the winters when you live off the land like that. So they spend a lot of time hunting and learning to hunt and canning and stocking up on food so that in the winter when, you know, it's grim times, they're prepared. And there's little seeds of worry here and there that are mentioned, like how is Ernst going to deal with the long, dark winter, but, you know, they just kind of stay focused and take it a day at a time. When Lenny starts school, there's just not many children her own age, but there is a boy named Matthew, and he's the son of Tom Walker. Tom Walker was the one that kind of owns the whole town. And she really takes a liking to him. They start hanging out all the time, and they're just good friends. And then the first winter comes, and as soon as the darkness comes, Ernst's nightmares start up again. And they're torturing him, these nightmares, and he just can't escape them. And he manages to kind of rustle up a few of the locals and get them in a sort of survivalist mindset, which is a thing that's happened to him since the war. He's constantly always thinking about what about when the next war comes, and what if we're invaded, and, you know, we're isolated here, we need to be prepared for when the invaders come. And he manages to get a couple of other local men on board, but they're not taking it quite as seriously as he is. He's like in it, and they're just more or less kind of humoring him. And as time goes by, he's just getting more and more paranoid, and he's getting more and more agitated and jealous of Tom Walker in particular. There's just something about Tom that drives Ernst crazy. And he's constantly accusing Tom of flaunting his wealth, and he's constantly accusing his wife of wanting Tom, which there's no evidence of that. You know, she's just friendly to him as she is to all of the other people in town, but Ernst just has it in his mind that she wants Tom. So eventually his suspicions and paranoias turn more and more towards domestic violence, and Lenny begins to hear whenever her dad gets upset, he comes home and he takes it out on her mom. And Lenny's so upset, and she doesn't know what to do. And the next morning, you know, her mom's always embarrassed and quiet, and if Lenny brings it up, her mom brushes it off and says, you know, he just loves us so much. He's so sorry, he'll never do it again. You know, the typical things that people who are in domestic abuse situations think and say. And for Cora, there's that added layer of she remembers him from before, and she knows in her heart that that man who she fell in love with is still in there somewhere. And she just thinks if we give it enough time, that man will be able to come to the surface again. And that just adds such an extra layer of sadness to the whole thing. Shortly after, there's an incident in the town when Matthew and his mom are out for a walk. It's winter, and they're walking on a frozen body of water, and Matthew's mother falls in and he can't get her out. And the whole town actually goes on a search because Matthew doesn't come home right away. He just kind of stays where she went under, and he's in shock and, you know, traumatized from watching his mother fall into the water and not being able to help her. So eventually they find Matthew, they figure out what happened, they bring him home. Shortly after that, there's a funeral, and at the funeral, after the actual funeral, they have like the service for her at one of the saloons in town. Even while they're there to bury Tom Walker's wife, Ernst still is accusing his wife of flirting with Tom. And he can't even control himself in that kind of setting. Like, it's to the point where it's getting more and more, he's becoming more and more untethered. You know, before he could contain it and it would only happen at home, and now it's happening in public. And so now people know, like, Large Marge and Tom Walker, they know because they can see, like, he's dragging her around, and, you know, the next day in town they see her and she has bruises all over her face, and Marge is like, listen, you need to get out of that situation now. And she's like, hey, I'll tell you this, I had a sister who's in a similar situation as you. I tried to get her out, she wouldn't come, and I said fine, and then I ran out of time because the next time he did it, he killed her. And Cora's like, oh, no, like, it's not like that, he's not like that. It happens again, and of course, and the police actually get called, and he gets taken to jail, because while Lenny and Cora are trying to run away from him, there's a car accident, and their bus goes off the road, and Cora gets even more injured, so she's been beaten by him, and then she breaks her arm very badly. Lenny goes and finds the nearest neighbor, which is Tom Walker. He comes and he gets them to the hospital in Homer, which is a small city not far from where they live. Along with that, Matthew, Tom's son, had been going through so much depression and anxiety after having witnessed his mom die, that eventually Tom decides it'd be best for Matthew to leave for a little while, to go to the city to stay with his sister, where, you know, he could get a therapist, go to a school where there's more children, where he can kind of live a more normal teenage life for a little while. And he does that, and it's very hard for the both of them because Lenny's now kind of left alone without a friend, and Matthew misses her so much while he's gone. Then we get a bit of a time jump, and now we're in 1978, and Lenny is 17, going to be 18 soon, and eventually Matthew decides to come back and finish his senior year back in his hometown with his dad. Things are good with his dad. For a long time, Matthew thought that his dad blamed him for his mom's accident, but of course he didn't. But Matthew always worried that he did. So things are heating up with Lenny and Matthew. They're falling in love slowly but surely. They're making plans to go off to college together. Although in the back of Lenny's mind, she's worried about how she's ever going to be able to leave her mom behind, knowing what's happening with her dad. Now, I just want to tell you, if you haven't read this book was this month's book club selection, but if you haven't read it and want to read it, or if you just don't want spoilers, now would probably be the time to click off, because we're going to get into a lot of stuff, some really heavy stuff that happens, and we'll get into the ending. So if you made it this far, thanks so much. And if you're going to keep listening, let's get going. So things at home aren't great, of course. Ernst is only getting worse, not better. He hates that Lenny is trying to be friends with Matthew, and he has forbid her from seeing him because Matthew is Tom Walker's son, and Ernst is, for whatever reason, so jealous of Tom Walker. So they have to start seeing each other in secret, and that's very difficult. They have to sneak around at night. When their parents go out of town to get supplies, they have to sneak around then. And it's actually during one of those times when they're sneaking around that, because here's the thing, they're not just sneaking around, they're sneaking around while her father is very paranoid that she's going to be doing this. So he is constantly looking for her, and if he doesn't know where he is, he will be stalking through town trying to find her. So at one point, her and Matthew sneak off into like this little cabin by the beach, and they're together. At this point, they've been intimate together, and you know, they're very serious about their relationship. They want to go to the University of Anchorage together, and they've just got this big, beautiful plan. And while they're together in this cabin, they fall asleep. and they wake up and they can hear Ernst nearby, and so they start to run. And as they're running, they run out, and there's like a beach, and there's rocky cliffs and things like that, and they're running, and Lenny falls. But she's okay, but she's fallen, and she's down in like a thing, a pit. And Matthew says he's going to come down and get her, and she's like, no, don't. And as he's trying to get down to her, he takes a very, very nasty fall. And it doesn't kill him, but it almost does. So he gets taken to the hospital, and there they find out that he suffered brain damage, that he may be paralyzed. They don't know. At this point, they don't even know if they take him off the respirator, if he'll be able to breathe on his own. But they take him off, and he was able to. And Lenny is, of course, devastated. She feels guilty. She's constantly apologizing to Tom for putting his son in that position. Tom, of course, knows that it's not her fault. And it's just a very sad situation. So she spends as much time as she can at the hospital. But eventually they tell her, just go on home. We can't stay here. We'll keep you updated. They go home, and Ernst soon thereafter is in another one of his moods, and he gets very violent, and towards both of them at this point. But it's like, this is a while after now, and Lenny has discovered that she's pregnant. So here she is, 18 years old, pregnant. The father of her baby, who she loves so much, is possibly paralyzed, definitely brain damaged, and in the hospital. At home, she's got her mother, who's being beaten almost daily, and her father, who's suffering madly from PTSD and other mental health issues. And it's a grim situation. One night when her dad is having a particularly violent streak, to try to, take the focus off her mother and get him to snap him back to reality, she blurts out that she's pregnant. But this has the opposite effect on him. And instead of kind of bringing him down to earth, it enrages him. And he starts hitting her with his fists, and then he takes his belt off and starts hitting her with that. Eventually her mom sees this happening, and as I feel like in a lot of domestic abuse situations, the woman, when you see it depicted, it seems like the woman can take it herself. She'll suffer it. But if she sees her children suffer it, that's kind of what makes it click. And Lenny can hear her mom say, "Not my Lenny," and then a gun goes off, and her mom had shot her dad in the back. And then she shoots him a second time just to be sure. From there, they kind of freak out. They take his body, they get rid of it, they put it in the water, and they know just from knowing that if they stick around, Cora could end up spending the rest of her life in jail, even though she was a domestic abuse victim, even though the whole town knows about it and would most definitely, testify to that. There's no guarantee that she's not going to spend the rest of her life in jail, and so they run. They run back to Cora's hometown. And Cora's had kind of a strained relationship with her parents because of Ernst. Her parents didn't think he was a good match. They got together so young. She got pregnant so young, and on and on. But still, they know they can go back there. They have a safe place to fall there. And so they do. And they explain the whole situation to her parents. For a while, they follow the story on the news and in the newspapers. And it's kind of being written like a whole family has disappeared. After a few months, they stop looking. They assume the whole family's dead. Police officers actually come to the house to tell Cora's parents that they're presumed dead. They get new identities with the help of Cora's dad, who's a lawyer, and they kind of just start their lives on the down low back in her hometown. Before too long, Lenny has the baby. It's a little boy that looks just like Matthew, and she names him Matthew Jr., and they call him MJ for short. And, you know, they start to live the best lives that they can at this point, you know. Cora carries around a lot of guilt that she stayed with Ernst for as long as she did. A lot of guilt that she subjected her daughter to that kind of home environment. And also a lot of guilt that she killed him because she loves him so much, no matter what. And even though she can see with her own eyes, and even her mom tells her, like, Lenny's fine. She's got this kid, she's in university. Eventually she graduates. She's fine. You need to let it go and not carry that guilt around. But of course, that's easier said than done. And then Cora gets cancer, lung cancer. And by the time they find it, it's stage 4. And the doctor tells her she doesn't have much time left. So before she dies, what she does is she writes up a confession saying that Cora Albright, killed my husband. My daughter had nothing to do with it. End of story, case closed. She signs it. She has her father, who's a lawyer, sign it as the witness. And she gives it to Lenny, and she says, if you ever need this, here it is. Once Cora has passed away, Lenny's grandmother gives her this little box that Cora had wanted Lenny to have, and inside of it is a picture of Ernst and Cora on their wedding day, and one from when Lenny was a baby, just pictures of her life. And she says to her, don't forget the happy times too. There were a lot of really bad times, I know, but try in your heart to also keep room for the happy times. And she tells Lenny to go home, and she gives her, in this box, she's left her 2 plane tickets to Alaska. Her grandmother's like, please don't go, that's not your home. Your home is here with me. But Lenny says, I gotta go. I want to show MJ where he's from, where he was conceived, where his father lived. And it had been a long time since she'd called to check on Matthew. She'd called for months and months. Every time she did, she got the same thing. Oh, his condition's the same, no improvement. But then when they changed their names and started to live their new lives, part of it was she couldn't call anymore. Because, they didn't want the police to put it all together and track them. So she goes back to Alaska. She goes to Homer, and the first thing she does is she goes to the police station. The chief is the same guy that was the chief when Matthew's mother died, so she recognizes him. And when she walks in, he's kind of like, holy crap, Lenora Albright, we thought you were dead. And she says, no, we're not dead. Well, me and my mom weren't dead. And she gives him the letter. And he's trying to get her to say she had something to do with it. And she's like, well, no, I was a kid. I had nothing to do with killing him. And then he keeps trying to get her to say anything. And, he's like, you're trying to tell me she, a small woman, on her own, dragged his body into the water that's pretty far from your house. And eventually she's like, well, I helped her. And she says that because he's been urging her, saying, tell the truth, you'll feel better. And then he says, okay, great, I just need you to write all this down. And she's like, I don't want to. And he's like, you have to. And she says, once I do that, we're done. And he says, yeah, we're done. So she writes it all out, and then he says, okay, I have your signed confession. Lenora Albright, you're under arrest. And she's like, well, what? She said, you said we'd be done. And he's like, yeah, you and I are done. Now I'm handing you off to whoever. And he's like, if you don't have anyone to look after your son, he's going to be put into, social services. And she's like, no, that's not happening. So she gets him to call Tom Walker and a lawyer. Tom comes, takes MJ. You know, she explains the whole thing to him, and he's like, don't worry, we will get this figured out. So eventually her arraignment comes, and Large Marge hears of what had happened, that Lenore's back. She hears what happened with her mom and her dad. She barges in. She's telling them all that she can about what she knew and what she saw, and the judge is kind of like, Marge, sit down. This isn't a trial. This is just the arraignment. And anyway, she gets on the phone with like a higher up, tells the story, and all the charges eventually get dropped against Lenny. Thank God. At that point I was like, oh my Lord, how much more can go wrong in this woman's life? So the charges gets dropped. She gets to go back to the small town where she lived. I can never remember the name of the town. It starts with a K. It's in Alaska. If you know what I'm talking about, you can tell me down below. So at this point, MJ is like 5 or 6 years old. You know, he's old enough to know what's happening, where he is, all of that kind of stuff. She tells Tom that she wants MJ to meet Matthew. She's like, I know he won't understand what's happening, but I've told MJ about him, so much about him. I want MJ to be able to meet him himself. Tom's like, okay, if that's what you want, let's go right now. So she goes. She's expecting Tom to walk to his truck, but Tom starts walking to this cabin behind the house. And she's like, wait, we're not going to the hospital? He's like, nope, come with me. So they get down to the cabin, and she sees a wheelchair ramp going up, and she goes in, and in there is Matthew. He's in a wheelchair, but he can walk, just not too much. So when he doesn't need to be walking, he prefers to use the wheelchair. His face is almost unrecognizable, as it was when he was in the hospital last time she saw him, just brutalized from the fall. And she can tell he's a little different by the way he speaks. Like, she can see the brain damage, but it doesn't seem to be too severe. You know, he can communicate, and the more they talk, the more she sees that it's him. It's Matthew. And so after a while she says, there's someone I want you to meet. Come outside with me. He's outside. And when she says he's outside, Matthew thinks that she's brought a boyfriend or a husband, and he gets, a little offended by that. But then she tells him, it's your son. And of course he's floored by that. It's a very emotional moment. And he gets up and walks out and sees MJ. And it's just a beautiful moment. Matthew, for a minute, he's worried that MJ's going to look at him and be repulsed or embarrassed because of how, deformed his face is. But he isn't at all, because, of course, to Matthew's basing it on how he used to look, so it's a very drastic difference. But to this little boy who has heard nothing but wonderful, loving things from his mother about this man, MJ's taken with him immediately. And it's just this beautiful reunion. And we kind of get a bit of a flash forward. And we learn that Lenny and Matthew got back together. Got to finally live that happily ever after they wanted. They had 2 more children, and it's just, they stay in Arizona because, that's Matthew's heritage. It's his legacy, this town, and they just have a nice, simple life. And the ending is very emotional, and you're like, so happy that, because so many bad things just keep piling on top of this poor girl. When she finally gets that happy ending, you're like, oh, good. Good, she deserves it. So that, my friends, is The Great Alone. Beautiful cover. I love the colors. I kind of tried to keep it. I got the yellow there, and I got some orange on my eyes. I tried to keep similar color scheme to the book. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. If you read this book, let me know in the comments down below. And thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great weekend, and I will see you on Monday. Bye, guys.